The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed like a judge's hammer. Click. The lock turned without hesitation. Click. My key no longer fit. I stood frozen on the cold hallway floor, heart pounding, breath catching. The landlord's cruel smirk burned in my mind like a brand. As I realized the truth, they had locked me out of my own apartment. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, a deliberate act of erasure. I knocked, desperate, pleading silently to the cold walls. No answer, only silence. My home, my sanctuary, my refuge, had become a fortress designed to keep me out. I staggered back, numb fingers trembling as I pulled out my phone. No missed calls, no messages, no mercy. The building I had poured blood, sweat, and tears into was no longer mine. And in that moment, beneath the harsh flickering hallway light, a fire ignited deep within me. Fierce, unrelenting, unstoppable. They thought this was the end of me. But they had no idea I was only just beginning. The stale air in the dimly lit hallway seemed thicker than usual, heavy with neglect and the faint scent of mildew that always lingered in old buildings like this. Paint peeled from the walls in curling strips, and the flickering fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, casting uneven shadows that danced like ghosts. The cracked linoleum floor underfoot, worn from years of footsteps and stories, felt cold and unforgiving. I leaned against the rough brick wall, pressing my forehead against its coarse surface, trying to steady my ragged breathing. My hands were clammy, fingers slick with sweat despite the chill in the air. 1,000 questions flooded my mind, pounding like relentless thunder. Why? How could they do this without warning? Who gave them the right? I swallowed hard. This was not just a lock on a door, it was a lock on my life, my memories, my very existence within these walls. The tiny apartment inside had been more than just a place to live. It was where I had painted late into the night, where I had danced alone in the kitchen, where I had cried after every heartbreak and celebrated every small victory. Now, I was a stranger outside, a ghost watching from the cold as my world was sealed away. Around me, the murmurs of early risers echoed faintly from distant apartments. Doors opened and closed, footsteps hurried past, but no one stopped to ask why I was there, why I was locked out. The building had swallowed me whole and spat me out. I slid down to the floor, knees drawn to my chest, and let the tears come. The betrayal was a heavy stone pressing on my chest. I thought of the landlord, Mr. Harris, a man who had once greeted me with a warm smile, promising stability and respect. But behind that mask, he was a puppeteer, and I, an unfortunate marionette severed from the strings. Then there was the note left taped to my mailbox, mocking in its brevity. Lease terminated, vacate immediately. No exceptions, no signature, no explanation, just cold, bureaucratic finality. The hours crawled as I sat there, every minute searing into my memory. I thought of my belongings trapped inside, my books, my clothes, the small potted plant I had nurtured since the day I moved in, its leaves now probably wilting in neglect. My phone buzzed intermittently, but no calls from friends, no help. Only messages from strangers, people curious about the drama, others eager to judge. I was alone. But beneath the despair, something fierce began to rise, a quiet storm gathering strength. The next morning, wrapped in a threadbare jacket, I made my way to the nearby cafe, my refuge in this bleak new reality. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the hum of conversation, a stark contrast to the cold silence of the hallway. I watched the steam rise from my cup, tracing invisible patterns in the air, and realized something profound. I had two choices. I could crumble, or I could fight back. And fight back I would. As I scrolled through real estate listings on my phone, each advertisement fueled my resolve. Buildings, old tenements, investment properties, names and numbers blending into a symphony of possibility. If they thought locking me out would end my story, they were gravely mistaken. This was my rebirth. My rise. My reclamation. And one day, the locks they slammed in my face would turn in my hands. Their doors would be mine to open and close. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when I stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk, the city still wrapped in the sleepy haze of dawn. The air smelled faintly of rain and exhaust, a bitter perfume of urban life that never quite felt like home anymore. My breath formed little clouds as I exhaled, each one dissolving quickly into the chilly morning. I tightened the scarf around my neck and adjusted the straps of my worn leather backpack. Inside, the only thing of real value was my battered notebook, pages filled with scribbled plans, sketches, and the stubborn pulse of hope. Every line was a promise to myself, this won't be the end. My mind wandered back to the moment it all shattered, the lock turning cold and final, but I forced myself to stop dwelling there. If I wanted to reclaim what was stolen, I had to move forward, to rise. The little cafe on the corner, the rusty kettle, was already alive with the clatter of cups and the murmur of early patrons. I pushed through the door, welcomed by the comforting warmth and the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans. Behind the counter, Maria flashed her usual bright smile. "Rough night?" she asked, pouring dark liquid into a chipped ceramic mug. I nodded, clutching the cup between my hands. "You could say that." She didn't press further. Maria had learned over the years that some wounds took time to reveal themselves. Instead, she offered a plate of warm croissants, fresh from the oven. I sank into the corner seat, the worn leather chair creaking beneath me, and pulled out my notebook. Today's agenda was clear: research, strategize, and above all, prepare. My first step was the real estate market. I scrolled through listings, eyeing buildings with faded facades and worn-down charm, the kind of places investors overlooked, but dreamers like me could transform. One listing caught my eye, a modest 3-story building not far from the cafe. It had character, peeling paint, iron balconies draped with creeping ivy, and a faded brass plaque that read the Emerson. The asking price was reasonable, far below market value. A building like this was a diamond in the rough. I bookmarked it. Outside, the city began to stir more vividly. The distant wail of sirens mingled with the chatter of street vendors setting up their stalls. A group of children chased a stray ball, their laughter piercing the morning gloom like music. But beneath the city's life, I felt the undercurrent of betrayal still pulsing, a quiet reminder that this journey wasn't just about property. It was about reclaiming power, dignity, and self-worth. I remembered the day I first stepped into my old apartment, a small space with creaky wooden floors and sunlight spilling through tall windows like golden syrup. It smelled of fresh paint and promise. The landlord had smiled then, a man with kind eyes and a steady handshake. "This will be your home," he said. "Make it yours." I had smiled back, not knowing that just months later, he would become the architect of my exile. Returning to the present, I closed the notebook with a decisive snap. The plan was forming, piece by piece. I would save, scrape, borrow, if I had to, and buy the Emerson, not just to live in, but to own the very ground beneath their feet. A sudden chill swept through the cafe as a figure entered, tall, impeccably dressed, with an air of quiet authority. Mr. Harris, the landlord who had locked me out. His gaze briefly met mine, eyes cold and unreadable. I did not flinch. Instead, I raised my cup and took a slow sip, tasting the bitter strength of my resolve. The game was on. After hours of calls and emails, I secured a meeting with a small but reputable real estate agent named Claire. She was sharp, no nonsense, with a reputation for helping overlooked clients snag hidden gems. We met in a cluttered office filled with blueprints and property flyers. Claire laid out the possibilities: zoning laws, financing options, and upcoming auctions. She listened carefully as I described my goals, nodding thoughtfully. "Buying a building like the Emerson won't be easy," she warned. "But with the right plan, it's possible." I smiled, the fire inside me growing brighter. Possible wasn't enough. I was going to make it happen. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of Claire's office, casting long amber streaks across the cluttered desk. The scent of aged paper mixed with the faint undertone of brewing coffee, creating an atmosphere that felt both grounding and full of quiet possibility. Outside, the city's pulse quickened as workers hurried home and street vendors called out their final sales. Across from me, Claire tapped a pen thoughtfully against a thick binder. Her gaze was steady, professional, the kind of woman who had seen dreams both crushed and realized. "Here's what we're dealing with," she said, flipping open the binder to reveal faded blueprints and maps. "The Emerson is structurally sound but needs work. The previous owners, well, current ones, have neglected maintenance. Tenants complain, rents below market?" I nodded, absorbing every detail like it was a puzzle piece forming a new picture. My picture. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing with focus. "The key is timing. The building's coming up for auction next month. If you can secure financing, make a compelling offer, you have a shot." The word auction made my heart skip. It sounded like a battleground, a contest where fortunes were made and lost in a heartbeat. But I welcomed the challenge. "How do I prepare?" I asked, voice steady but betraying a hint of excitement. Claire smiled, a rare softness breaking through her professional demeanor. "First, get your finances in order. Talk to lenders, gather proof of funds. Then, research the tenants. Knowing who's inside will help you navigate after the purchase." She slid me a folder with tenant lists and building reports. The pages rustled as I thumbed through them. Names, phone numbers, complaints, rent ledgers. This was no longer just a building, it was a community. A living entity that I would soon inherit. That evening, alone in a cramped rented room, I spread the documents across a tiny desk illuminated by a single lamp. The silence pressed in on me, broken only by the scratching of my pen as I took notes, cross-referenced tenants, and jotted down questions for Claire. Among the names, one stood out. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, a feisty older woman known for her sharp tongue and staunch defense of the building's residents. If I was to succeed, I would need her on my side. The thought made my chest tighten. Rebuilding wasn't just about property. It was about trust, about repairing fractured relationships. I paused, fingers hovering over the notes. How had it come to this? From tenant to outsider, then future owner? The twists of fate were cruel but fascinating. The next days blurred into a whirlwind of preparation. I visited local banks, juggling conversations about credit scores, loan terms, and collateral. Each rejection stung, a reminder of the steep hill ahead. But with every no, my resolve only hardened. I met with friends and mentors, carefully piecing together a support network. I learned about investment partners, mortgage brokers, and legal counsel. Late nights were spent reading everything I could find on property auctions, the rules, strategies, horror stories, and success tales. In the quiet hours, I allowed myself brief moments of doubt, but they were fleeting. The fire inside me had grown into a blaze that would not be extinguished. One rainy afternoon, as I stepped out of a meeting with a potential investor, the city seemed to close in tighter. Raindrops hammered the pavement, turning the streets slick and shiny. I pulled my coat tighter, eyes scanning the faces around me, strangers rushing past, oblivious to the battle brewing in my heart. Among them, I spotted a familiar figure, the landlord who had locked me out. His expression was unreadable as he stepped into a sleek black car and disappeared into the gray blur of the city. For a moment I stood still, the rain soaking through my clothes but not touching the fire burning within. They had taken everything from me once. Now the tables were turning. The morning of the auction arrived with a heavy gray sky pressing down on the city. Rain drizzled intermittently, turning sidewalks slick and reflecting the dull gleam of streetlights that hadn't yet surrendered to daylight. The cold seeped through my coat, but I barely noticed. Inside, my mind raced faster than any storm. For weeks, I had prepared every scrap of paperwork, every financial projection, every whispered conversation with potential partners and advisors. Today, everything hinged on those moments behind the auctioneer's podium. The Emerson was more than bricks and mortar now. It was a symbol of everything I had lost, and everything I was determined to reclaim. Arriving early, the auction house felt like entering a different world. Marble floors echoed with sharp footsteps. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across the room, filled with sharp suits and watchful eyes, the atmosphere thick with ambition and veiled aggression. I clutched my bid paddle tightly, feeling its weight like a talisman of hope. Around me, whispers swirled, investors sizing up properties, speculating on values, some familiar names from the local real estate circles, others shadowy newcomers with sharp smiles and sharper suits. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the peeling paint and faded carpets of the Emerson. Claire sat beside me, her presence steady and reassuring. "Remember," she whispered, "keep your bids calculated. Don't get caught in the heat." I nodded, eyes fixed on the auctioneer as he adjusted his glasses and tapped the microphone. "We begin with property number 14, the Emerson, 47 Linden Street." A hush fell over the room. A large photograph of the building appeared on the screen behind the auctioneer, its ivy-clad facade, worn balconies, and shuttered windows telling a silent story. The bidding opened slowly. Hands rose, tentative, testing the waters. My heart thudded in my chest as the numbers climbed. The bids came fast and fierce. Some competitors were seasoned sharks, eyes gleaming with ruthless calculation. I forced my breath steady, waiting for the right moment. Then, a voice called out, firm and clear, 15,000. The paddle in my hand rose. 18,000, mine. The room seemed to hold its breath as the numbers jumped higher, each bid a challenge thrown like a gauntlet. 22,000, 25, 30. The auctioneer's gavel hovered, tension thick as fog. Suddenly, a bidder from the back called out, voice dripping with authority, 40,000. The room buzzed. 40,000 was bold, but not impossible. I glanced at Claire. She gave a slight nod. With steady determination, I raised my paddle. 45,000. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The next bids came rapidly, a blur of numbers and nerves. At one point, my paddle nearly slipped from clammy fingers. Sweat trickled down my temple, but I refused to relent. This was not just a financial battle. It was personal. Every cent represented a piece of my dignity, a step closer to reclaiming my life. After what felt like an eternity, the auctioneer's voice broke through the roar of tension. Going once, going twice. I raised my paddle one last time, voice steady, 55,000. The room fell silent. The gavel slammed down. Sold to bidder number 12. I exhaled. Relief and disbelief crashing in waves. Outside the auction house, the rain had ceased, leaving the city washed clean, the air crisp and new. Claire smiled. "Congratulations. You're the new owner of the Emerson." My fingers curled around the contract, the weight of reality settling in. This was no longer a dream or a plan. It was mine. That night, standing before the Emerson, I traced the outline of the building in the moonlight. Windows dark and empty, doors locked tight. But soon, every lock would turn for me. Every hallway would echo with my footsteps. Every tenant would see the face of the woman who refused to be forgotten. The fight was far from over, but the seeds of rebellion had been sown, and nothing could stop what was coming next. The morning light spilled weakly through the heavy clouds, casting a gray pallor over Linden Street. The Emerson stood silent and still, a monument of faded glory, waiting for new breath. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and rust, the unmistakable aroma of a building long neglected but still stubbornly standing. I stood before the massive front door, keys heavy in my palm. The metal felt cold and unfamiliar, but also promising, a tangible token of the victory hard won. My heart pounded as I inserted the largest key into the lock. It resisted at first, stiff and unyielding like the building itself, but then turned with a satisfying click. The door swung open, creaking on ancient hinges to reveal the dim interior. The musty smell of aged wood, dust, and lingering memories enveloped me. I stepped inside cautiously, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the cavernous lobby. Inside, the reality was harsher than I remembered. Peeling wallpaper curled away from the walls, revealing cracked plaster beneath. A cracked chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, its crystals dulled with grime. The thick carpet was threadbare and stained, evidence of decades of foot traffic and neglect. Yet, amid the decay, I saw potential. Bones waiting to be clothed anew. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos, sending quick texts to Claire and my growing team of contractors and advisors. The tenants soon began to stir, their cautious eyes watching from behind worn curtains and cracked windows. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, true to her reputation, was the first to approach. Her silver hair framed a face carved with years of hardship and sharp intelligence. Her eyes, a steely blue, appraised me with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "So, you're the new owner," she said, voice gravelly but firm. I met her gaze evenly. "Yes. I'm here to restore this building, and to restore trust." She crossed her arms. "Words are cheap. We'll see if you walk the walk." I nodded. "I intend to." Other tenants soon emerged, murmuring among themselves. Some greeted me with wary smiles, others with folded arms and guarded silence, the weight of their expectations pressed down like the crumbling plaster above. Over the following weeks, the transformation began. Blueprints were spread across folding tables in the lobby. Contractors bustled through halls measuring, planning, and breathing life into the old bones. Every crack and creak was catalogued, every tenant concern logged and addressed. I attended meetings, mediations, and late-night phone calls, my days stretching long into the shadows. One evening, just as dusk was fading, a confrontation awaited me near the mailboxes. Mr. Harris, the former landlord, appeared suddenly, his expression unreadable but his posture rigid. "I see you've made yourself comfortable," he said, voice low. I squared my shoulders. "This building belongs to its people now." His eyes flashed coldly. "You think you can undo everything with fancy talk and quick fixes? You're in over your head." I met his challenge calmly. "Maybe. But I'm not backing down." He turned sharply and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a trail of tension. That night, I stood alone in my temporary apartment, exhaustion weighing heavily. But beneath the fatigue, a fierce determination burned bright. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles old and new. Yet, I was no longer a tenant locked out. I was an owner, a guardian of stories, a builder of futures. And as the city lights flickered outside my window, I whispered a promise to myself. I will change every lock. Not just on these doors, but on every injustice I've ever endured. The first light of dawn filtered weakly through the cracked windows of the Emerson, casting fragmented beams across the peeling wallpaper and dusty floorboards. The building groaned softly, as if awakening from a long slumber, creaking and settling with the weight of years. I stood in the middle of the main hallway, clipboard in hand, surveying the chaos that was slowly becoming progress. Contractors moved like ghosts, their tools echoing in the cavernous space. The sharp crack of a hammer, the steady drone of a drill, the scrape of a broom against cracked tile. Every sound felt like a heartbeat in the life I was trying to breathe back into this place. But renovating was not just about bricks and mortar, it was about people. I made my way door to door, knocking softly, introducing myself to tenants I hadn't yet met. Their faces told stories of hardship and resilience. A young mother juggling 2 jobs, an elderly couple who had lived here since the 70s, a recent immigrant trying to find her footing in a strange new world. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, ever vigilant, walked beside me as I inspected the aging electrical wiring. "This building's seen better days, no doubt," she muttered. "But it's home, and home's worth fighting for." Her words struck a chord. It wasn't just the physical structure I was restoring, it was their lives, their memories. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. Not everyone welcomed change. Some tenants feared rent hikes or eviction disguised as renovation. Whispers of distrust shadowed the corridors. One afternoon, I was met with a group of concerned residents in the lobby. Their voices rose, a chorus of frustration and fear. "Will we be pushed out?" one asked, eyes fierce. "Are you here for us, or just the money?" Another demanded. I listened. Heart aching. I knew their fears were real. The history of displacement ran deep. "I'm here to build with you, not against you," I assured them. "Renovations mean better living conditions, yes, but I promise no one will be forced out unfairly." It was a fragile promise, but one I intended to keep. Meanwhile, the shadow of Mr. Harris loomed large. He had not given up. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, warning tenants of unfair rent increases and predatory ownership. Anonymous calls threatened disruptions. The battle was no longer just about property. It was about power, control, and broken trust. One evening, I found a note slipped under my door, handwritten and terse: "Stay out of my way, or face the consequences." The warning stoked a fire rather than fear. Among the challenges, small victories blossomed. The lobby was repainted a warm cream, its cracked plaster patched and smoothed. The garden courtyard, long overgrown, was cleared and planted with fresh flowers, tended by tenants who began to smile more often. I hosted a tenants' meeting, bringing together voices previously unheard. We laughed, planned, and dreamed, a fragile but growing community. One quiet moment, I climbed the stairs to the roof and looked out over the city skyline. The wind tugged at my coat, carrying with it the scent of rain and possibility. Below, the Emerson stood battered but unbroken, a symbol of resilience. I whispered to the wind, a vow carried beyond these walls: "This building will stand for all of us." The hum of life inside the Emerson had begun to change. Where once there was silence broken only by creaks and distant traffic, now the building stirred with voices. Conversations, laughter, even the occasional heated argument. The tenants, once wary and fragmented, were slowly knitting together a fragile community, bound by shared struggle and tentative hope. I walked the halls daily, greeting familiar faces, and listening to stories that painted the true heartbeat of this place. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman's story. One afternoon, I found Mrs. Whitman tending to the courtyard garden. Her hands, gnarled from years of labor, gently pruned a rosebush, the thorns a sharp contrast to the delicate blooms. She spoke quietly about her late husband, a man who had fought to keep their home during tougher times. "This building," she said, eyes distant, "holds more than tenants. It holds memories, lives lived with dignity and struggle." Her words struck me deeply. The renovation was not just a physical act, but a restoration of legacy. The young mother. In apartment 3B, I met Jasmine, a single mother balancing work and school. Her small son played quietly in the corner as she spoke about her fears of displacement. "I just want my son to have a safe place to grow up," she said, voice trembling. "I'm grateful for the changes, but I worry about what comes after." Her vulnerability reminded me of the stakes. This was no longer about buildings but about futures. Rising tensions. Yet, beneath the surface of hope, Mr. Harris's presence grew more menacing. Flyers appeared again, more aggressive this time, slandering my name and accusing me of greedy profiteering. One evening, a group of his sympathizers confronted me outside the building. Their words were sharp, filled with threats masked as warnings. "This isn't your fight," one snarled. "Stay out before things get ugly." I met their hostility with calm resolve. I'm here for the tenants, and I won't back down. The confrontation ended without violence, but the message was clear: the battle was intensifying. Late-night discovery. During a late-night walk through the building, I discovered signs of sabotage. Cut wires, a broken window latch, and the unmistakable scent of gasoline near the basement. Fear flickered briefly, but was quickly replaced by determination. Whoever wanted to stop this fight was willing to burn everything down. I immediately called the police and reinforced security measures, rallying tenants to stay vigilant. A moment of quiet. One rainy night, I sat by my window, watching raindrops race down the glass. The city lights blurred into a kaleidoscope of color, a chaotic beauty. Despite the threats and setbacks, a fierce hope burned inside me, a promise to myself and to every tenant that the Emerson would not just survive but thrive. The locks had changed. The fight had begun. And I was ready. The night had settled over the Emerson like a heavy cloak, thick and suffocating. The usual city sounds, the distant hum of cars, the faint murmur of late-night conversations, were muted beneath a brooding silence. Inside, the tenants were tucked away in their apartments, unaware of the danger creeping closer. I was finishing paperwork in the makeshift office set up in the lobby when the sharp clang of metal shattered the quiet. The emergency alarm blared, piercing through the stillness with a shrill urgency. Heart pounding, I sprinted toward the stairwell, the acrid smell of smoke stinging my nostrils before I even reached the door. Chaos erupted as tenants scrambled from their apartments, coughing and gasping for fresh air. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall, weaving through the smoke-filled corridors, looking for the source. Near the basement entrance, flames licked hungrily at the peeling wallpaper, the smoke billowing thick and black. Someone had set a fire, deliberate, calculated. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I shouted orders, guiding tenants to safety, checking rooms for stragglers. Mrs. Whitman appeared, coughing but steady. "We must get everyone out," she urged, her voice fierce despite the smoke. Together we moved through the chaos, leading tenants down narrow stairwells, out into the wet street where fire trucks had arrived, their lights painting the night in urgent blues and reds. As the flames were subdued, the reality sank in. This was no accident. A message had been sent, clear and terrifying. The battle to reclaim the Emerson had become a war. In the aftermath, as tenants huddled in blankets and shared worried glances, I stood firm, determined. "This building is our home," I told them, voice steady. "We will rebuild. We will not be driven out by fear." Their eyes, shining with gratitude and renewed strength, fueled the fire inside me, but the attack also sparked changes. Security was tightened, cameras installed. I reached out to local authorities and community leaders, building alliances beyond the walls. Negotiations with insurance companies and city officials began, navigating a maze of bureaucracy and red tape. And Mr. Harris? He was nowhere to be seen, but his shadow lingered. The threat was real, but so was our resolve. That night, alone in my temporary apartment, I stared at the ceiling, thoughts swirling. The fight had become bigger than me, bigger than any one person. It was about community, resilience, and justice. The locks had been changed, but the true key was courage, and I had plenty to give. The sun rose slowly the morning after the fire, casting pale light over Linden Street. The smoke that lingered like a stubborn ghost began to thin, revealing charred walls and shattered glass where the flames had fiercely consumed parts of the Emerson. Standing amidst the wreckage, I felt the weight of loss settle in my chest, yet beneath it, an unyielding flame of hope burned brighter than ever. The damage was severe but not irreversible. Contractors swarmed the building, assessing structural damage and beginning immediate cleanup. Dust and ash coated every surface, but beneath the grime, the bones of the building remained strong, a promise that restoration was possible. I walked through the halls alongside tenants, witnessing both despair and determination etched in their faces. Jasmine cradled her son tightly, her eyes wary but steadfast. Mrs. Whitman, despite her age, moved with purpose, organizing volunteers to distribute blankets and food. We gathered in the community room, a once-forgotten space now reborn as a sanctuary for hope. Voices intertwined with stories of courage and survival. Old grievances gave way to new bonds. Each person shared a piece of their soul, knitting the frayed edges of this building's heart. I spoke to the group, my voice steady. "We faced a darkness last night, but together we will rebuild stronger than before. This building is ours, our home, our family." Applause broke out, echoing off the walls, a symphony of resilience. Amid the rebuilding, a surprising ally emerged. Claire, the real estate agent who had been my guide, revealed connections to a local nonprofit focused on urban renewal. Through her, we secured grants and resources, breathing fresh energy into the restoration efforts. Her unwavering support reminded me that no fight was solitary, that community extended beyond these walls. Yet challenges persisted. Negotiations with insurers were slow and frustrating. The building's history of neglect worked against us. The shadow of Mr. Harris lingered, and whispers of his next move unsettled tenants. One evening, I received an anonymous tip, a meeting with a mysterious figure offering information and assistance. The encounter was tense but illuminating. revealing cracks in Mr. Harris's defenses and the extent of his desperation. As weeks turned into months, the transformation became visible. Fresh paint brightened hallways. New locks adorned doors, each one a symbol of reclaimed security. The garden flourished anew, tended by hands both young and old. Children played where once there was silence. Laughter echoed where there was fear. The Emerson was rising from the ashes, not just a building, but a beacon. And I stood at the forefront of this rebirth, scarred but unbroken, determined to protect what we had fought so hard to regain. The locks had been changed, but the true key was unwavering spirit, and that spirit was unstoppable. Months had passed since the fire, and the Emerson was no longer just a building in decline. It was a symbol of resilience and renewal. Fresh coats of paint brightened the halls, and the hum of everyday life filled its rooms. Yet, beneath this revival, an undercurrent of tension persisted. The fight was far from over. One crisp autumn morning, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, drawing the attention of tenants gathering outside. Mr. Harris stepped out, his presence as imposing as ever. His eyes scanned the crowd, lingering on me with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I see you've made quite the spectacle," he said, voice cold but controlled. "But this is still my city, and you've been playing a dangerous game." I met his gaze without flinching. This city belongs to its people, not to those who seek to profit from fear and neglect. He smirked, but the challenge in my voice was unmistakable. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." The confrontation was tense, words like knives cutting through the crisp air. Tenants gathered behind me, their presence a silent show of support. Mrs. Whitman's sharp eyes never left Mr. Harris, while Jasmine held her son close, determination shining in her expression. "You underestimated us," I said firmly. "But we've reclaimed more than a building. We've reclaimed hope." Mr. Harris's jaw clenched. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a trail of uneasy silence. That day marked a turning point. Mr. Harris's influence waned as tenants stood united, empowered by their shared victory. Community programs flourished, and the Emerson became a beacon of strength and solidarity. Late that night, alone in my office overlooking the city lights, I reflected on the journey. From the cold click of a lock to the warmth of reclaimed home, every moment had shaped me. The scars of battle were real, but so was the triumph. I whispered a vow to the night: no matter what comes next, this is only the beginning. The Emerson stood bathed in the soft glow of the early morning sun, its windows sparkling like hopeful eyes welcoming a brand new day. The air was filled with the gentle sounds of life, children's laughter drifting from the courtyard, neighbors exchanging greetings, and the distant melody of birdsong threading through the city's hum. Years of struggle, loss, and fierce determination had culminated in this moment. The building was no longer just bricks and mortar. It was a testament to resilience, to community, and to the unwavering spirit of those who called it home. I stood at the entrance, watching as tenants moved about with smiles and purpose. Mrs. Whitman tended to a blossoming rosebush near the garden bench, her hands steady despite the years. Jasmine's son chased a butterfly across the grass, his laughter pure and free. New families joined old, weaving a tapestry of lives intertwined by hope and hard work. Turning to the plaque near the front door, freshly installed and gleaming, I read the inscription aloud. "The Emerson, a home reclaimed, a community united." The words echoed the journey we had all taken, from darkness to light, from despair to rebirth. As I stepped inside, a wave of gratitude washed over me. The locks had changed, not just on doors, but on hearts. Trust had been rebuilt, fear replaced with courage. Every hallway whispered stories of redemption, every room echoed with possibility. Looking ahead, I knew challenges would come and go. But the Emerson's true strength lay not in its walls, but in its people, a family forged through fire and renewal. And as the sun climbed higher, casting its golden light across the city, I felt ready for whatever the future held. This was not just the end of a fight. It was the beginning of a legacy,